It's 11 p.m. The lights are out. The guards think everyone is asleep. But 3 men are already gone. And to this day, the FBI has no idea where they went. This is the story of the only 3 men who might have escaped from the world's most inescapable prison and were never found, dead or alive. What you're about to hear is not a Hollywood story, even though Hollywood did make a movie about it. What you're about to hear is a real FBI case file, a case that was investigated for 17 years, officially closed, and then quietly reopened when a letter showed up decades later. 3 criminals, 1 island surrounded by freezing shark-infested water, a 1-mile swim to freedom, and 0 bodies ever found. Did they make it? Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll have an answer, and it might shock you. Before we talk about the escape, you need to understand where these men were locked up, because Alcatraz wasn't just a prison, it was a message. Rising out of the icy waters of San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, nicknamed The Rock, was built to hold the men America had given up on. Opened in 1934, it sat on an isolated island with no bridge, no easy exit, and water so cold and current-heavy that swimming it was considered suicidal. Its roster read like a criminal hall of fame: Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, Robert the Birdman Stroud. These weren't petty thieves, these were men the government wanted disappeared from society. At its peak, Alcatraz held 280 inmates and roughly 250 civilian staff. Guards were everywhere, every inch of the island was accounted for. The official line from the prison administration was simple: no one escapes from Alcatraz. That sentence would age very, very poorly. Now, meet the men who would flip the script on the entire American prison system. Frank Morris, IQ of 133. Born in Washington, D.C. in 1926, he was a reader, a painter, a thinker, and above all, a chronic escaper. He'd already broken out of the Louisiana State Penitentiary and the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. When he arrived at Alcatraz in January 1960, an officer later said, "If I had to pick any inmate likely to make it run for it, Morris would have been my last choice." That right there tells you everything you need to know about how terrifyingly good he was. John and Clarence Anglin, brothers, bank robbers, and something else, extraordinary swimmers. Their family says they used to swim in Lake Michigan while ice still floated on the surface. They once tried to escape from Atlanta Federal Prison by hiding inside bread boxes. When guards discovered them, they were transferred to Alcatraz. In 1961, the brothers were reunited with Morris, and that's when everything changed. Allen West, the 4th man, loud, brash, always talking about escaping. When he arrived at Alcatraz for his 2nd stint in 1958, he already knew the prison inside out. His connections and knowledge of the facility would prove invaluable, but as we'll see, when it mattered most, West failed himself. By January 1961, all 4 men were together, and within weeks, they started planning. What these men pulled off with their bare hands in a maximum security prison under constant guard with 0 access to hardware stores or the internet is frankly staggering. It started with a weakness in the walls. Behind every cell was a ventilation shaft. Most were sealed with hardened concrete, But the men discovered that one ventilation shaft at the top of the building wasn't fully cemented shut. If they could reach it, they could reach the roof. And from the roof, they could reach the water. The problem? Getting there. Every night between 5:30 and 9:30 p.m., what the inmates called happy hour, the men began quietly chipping away at the concrete around their cell vents using the sharpened handles of stolen spoons. Night after night, for months. Then they'd fill the holes with wet toilet paper mixed with soap chips and cover everything with a fake vent cover that Morris had hand-drawn and painted to perfectly match the real one, even down to the crisscross pattern and exact shade of green. But the ingenuity didn't stop there. To get off the island, they needed to cross nearly a mile of freezing bay water. So Morris, who had read an article in Popular Mechanics magazine, figured out how to build life jackets and two 6x14-foot pontoon rafts from over 50 stolen Navy raincoats, stitched and sealed in a secret workshop they'd set up on top of their own cell block in a hidden utility corridor guards never patrolled. To inflate the raft, Morris disassembled a concertina, a small accordion-like instrument he'd bought from the prison, and used its bellows mechanism as a pump. To navigate the dark water, he built a flashlight from 2 batteries, a plastic box, a light bulb, and a metal fastener. He crafted wooden paddles. And here's the detail that separates this from every other prison break in history. Morris vulcanized the rubber on the rafts, a heat treatment technique developed by Charles Goodyear in the 1830s to make them more durable and tear-resistant. These weren't criminals improvising, this was engineering. When they discovered the rooftop vent was bolted shut with solid metal screws they couldn't loosen by hand, West, who was assigned maintenance work, volunteered to fix the prison's broken vacuum cleaner. Inside it, he found 2 motors. He fixed one, quietly removed the other, and fashioned it into a makeshift electric drill. That's how they got the screws out. Oh, and the dummy heads they left in their beds, made of plaster, soap, toilet paper, and real human hair that Clarence had been secretly stealing from his job at the prison barbershop. The guards didn't just not notice, they reportedly checked on the dummies during the night, thinking they were sleeping men. One officer later recalled reaching in and slapping the pillow before the head rolled off onto the floor. On the evening of June 10th, Morris sent word to the others, tomorrow night. At 9:30 p.m. on June 11th, 1962, the lights went out across Alcatraz. The men placed their dummy heads on their pillows, stuffed blankets under their sheets, squeezed through their cell vents, climbed the utility pipes in the dark, and disappeared. All except West. He hadn't finished widening his hole. While the others waited as long as they dared, Clarence tried to help break it open from the other side, but the noise was too risky. The Anglin brothers were restless, the window was closing, and so, without a final word, they left him. At 10:30 p.m., Morris forced open the roof vent. A guard in the West Gun Gallery heard a loud clang, like someone hitting the end of an empty 50-gallon oil drum, and reported it. The lieutenant investigated inside the prison, found nothing. Meanwhile, Morris and the Anglins were already on the roof, moving fast. In their rush, they dropped a paddle and left behind a spare life vest. John Anglin swung too hard down an exterior pipe, making a second loud noise heard by guards at 10:45 p.m. By 11 p.m., they were at the water's edge. West finally broke through at 1:45 a.m. He climbed to the roof. He found it empty. He stood there for a moment, thinking about what might have been. Then he climbed back down, crawled back into his cell, and got into bed. The next morning at 7:15 a.m., Officer Lawrence Bartlett reached Clarence Anglin's cell for the routine head count. He shook the sleeping form. It didn't move. He called for Lieutenant Long. Long reached through the bars and hit the pillow. The head flew off and struck the floor, broken nose and all. 3 cells were empty, 3 men were gone, and the most famous manhunt in American history had just begun. The FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in American history. Ships, helicopters, divers, bloodhounds. The bloodhounds tracked the men's scent down to the water's edge and stopped. Over the following days, scattered evidence emerged. A homemade wooden paddle found floating near Angel Island, exactly where the escapees planned to land. A packet of raincoat material floating in the bay, containing photos of the Anglin brothers and their friends and relatives. A life jacket with bite marks on the inflation tube, suggesting someone had been desperately trying to keep it inflated, found near Alcatraz. And critically, old FBI files only revealed years later in a 2011 National Geographic documentary confirmed that a raft was found on Angel Island with footprints leading away from it. That evidence was buried. The public never heard about it at the time. On that same June 12th morning, a 1955 blue Chevrolet was reported stolen in Marin County, but the theft wasn't reported to the FBI. The following day, a motorist in Stockton, California, 80 miles east of San Francisco, told state police he'd been forced off the road by 3 men in a blue Chevrolet. An off-duty San Francisco police officer named Robert Checky had reported seeing a suspicious white boat with its lights off in the bay at 1 a.m., a boat that later shone a spotlight on the water before vanishing under the Golden Gate Bridge. The FBI dismissed his account. After 17 years of investigation, the FBI officially closed the case on December 31st, 1979. Their conclusion: the 3 men most likely drowned in the freezing water. But the U.S. Marshal Service never closed theirs. The case remains open to this day. Morris and the Anglin brothers remain on the official wanted list until September 2026. They don't keep dead men on wanted lists. Here's where it gets truly wild. For years after the escape, the Anglin brothers' mother reportedly received roses delivered without a card, anonymously, every single year. Then in 1973, their mother passed away. At the funeral, with FBI agents watching, 2 mysterious figures arrived, wearing women's clothing, veiled hats, and sunglasses. They spoke to no one. They slipped away before anyone could reach them. U.S. Marshal Michael Dyke, who inherited the cold case in 2003, later said that evidence alone was enough to make him seriously wonder. In 2015, a History Channel documentary revealed Christmas cards bearing verified Anglin handwriting, though the envelopes contained no postmarks, making the date impossible to confirm. That same year, a photograph surfaced, allegedly taken in Brazil in 1975 by Fred Brizzi, a friend of the Anglin family, who claimed he ran into the brothers in Rio de Janeiro. 2 men, sunglasses on, older, but unmistakably resembling John and Clarence. Forensic experts confirmed the photo genuinely dated to 1975. Then, in January 2020, an Irish AI firm called Identev ran facial recognition analysis and concluded the men in the photo were more than likely the Anglin brothers. Retired U.S. Marshal Art Roderick called it absolutely the best actionable lead we've ever had. Then came the deathbed confession. In 2016, a man named John Leroy Kelly told his nurse he and an accomplice had been waiting in a white boat in San Francisco Bay on the night of June 11, 1962, and had picked up 3 men paddling toward the shore. The group then traveled together up the coast to Seattle. Remember Officer Chechi, the off-duty cop who saw a white boat with its lights off that the FBI dismissed? That boat. And then, the letter. In 2013, a handwritten letter arrived at a San Francisco police station. It read, My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence in Frank Morris. I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. Clarence died in 2008 and Morris died in 2005. The writer offered a deal: announce on national TV that he'd serve no more than 1 year in prison and receive medical treatment, and he'd reveal exactly where he was. The FBI tested it for fingerprints, DNA, and handwriting. All results? Inconclusive. As former FBI agent Jeff Harp put it, that means yes and it means no. This leaves everything in limbo. And to cap it all off, a 2014 study by scientists at Delft University determined that the men had launched their raft around 11:30 p.m., consistent with guard testimony. The tidal currents that night would have carried them directly to Horseshoe Bay. Any debris from a broken raft would have drifted toward Angel Island, exactly where their belongings were actually found. Mythbusters built a replica raft in 2003, following the prisoners' exact design. They rowed it from Alcatraz to shore. It worked. Let me give you the real answer. The FBI says they drowned, but the FBI also buried evidence of a raft with footprints on Angel Island. They dismissed a witness who saw a boat in the bay. They overlooked a stolen car in Marin County, and they closed a 17-year investigation without a single body. Here is what we actually know. The Anglin brothers were elite cold water swimmers. A computer model confirms the currents that night would have carried them to safety. A raft with footprints was found on Angel Island. A car was stolen in Marin County that same night. 3 men in a blue Chevrolet were spotted 80 miles away the next morning. Anonymous roses were sent to their mother for years. 2 disguised figures appeared at her funeral. A Brazil photo from 1975 was verified by AI facial recognition. A dying man's deathbed confession placed a pickup boat exactly where an off-duty cop saw one. And a letter from a man claiming to be John Anglin arrived, saying all 3 survived. In over 60 years, no bodies were ever found. The official verdict is drowning, but the evidence for survival keeps piling up, case after case, decade after decade. Whatever the truth is, 3 men walked into the most secure prison in the world, spent a year building an escape from scratch with stolen spoons and raincoats, and on the night of June 11, 1962, they slipped into the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay, and the world never saw them again. Whether they're at the bottom of that bay, or whether they spent their final decades on a farm in Brazil, sipping coffee and watching news reports about their own drowning, they will always be remembered for pulling off something the entire system said was impossible. The greatest escape in American history, and the mystery that may never be solved.
So, do you think they made it? Drop your verdict in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, real cases, real mysteries, real questions that nobody has answered, hit subscribe, because we're just getting started.